Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about using ICH E6R2 to develop risk management plans. So let's talk about using ICH E6R2 and how we use it from our perspective. This is me. I've been doing this for quite some time. Very excited that we are starting to get some traction from a regulatory as well as an international standards organization for risk management and risk assessment, something that been pushing for years and years. Unfortunately, even though we do see that some of our groups are familiar with some of the risk-based approaches that the FDA and others have put forward, they're not always being used. So I know myself as an auditor, what I've been seeing is that the majority of the monitoring plans, for example, that I have seen over the last several years have all reverted back to 100% source document verification, even though the FDA has told us we don't think that's effective. So it's not a surprise that monitoring continues to be one of the top findings. That's why the FDA put those plans in place to begin with. So we're going to talk about how we use these tools that are available to us and apply them so that we are functioning from a perspective of the sponsor, really, who is the originator of the research. You really kind of set the tone. Everything flows from that sponsor. So that's why there's a regulatory requirement that you provide investigators with all the information they need to properly conduct the study, that you are only selecting qualified vendors, including your investigators, to work on that study. So you really set the tone in terms of how we move forward and build quality in out of the gate, even before we get that study started. So we're going to talk about the learning objectives. We're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about where you are in terms of using these types of tools and doing an impact assessment. We'll look at the updates under section 5.0 for ICH E6R2. We'll talk about some of the things that we're seeing that are good, some of the things that we're seeing that could use some improvement, and as I said, tying back in to some of the guidance that we have. We'll also then look at how you're going to apply this, because it's really critical that we understand with any sort of systems approach, which we'll be discussing, quality systems, quality subsystems, and the processes that support them, that we actually have a plan for implementation and application. It's one thing to say, hey, this is new, we're going to do this, but then not move forward with it. It's common, unfortunately, that we will see policy statements that are not operational. So we'll see policies rather than procedures or processes. So we'll do a quick review, make sure that we're all moving forward in the same manner when we're done. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to look at a three-way risk evaluation methodology. We'll talk about the concepts of risk mitigation and risk acceptance. We know that things happen in clinical research. We know that non-compliance happens. It's what we do with it and how we try to mitigate it that makes or breaks us. Risk acceptance doesn't mean you just throw up your hands and say, well, these things happen. We're going to talk about the concept of predefined tolerance limits. What is your tipping point? What is, as one of my clients calls, a deal breaker or a non-starter? I forget what she said. But anyway, that's a non-starter. So have you defined, what are your expectations? And I think really one of the biggest takeaways that we have to consider anytime we are approaching an organization to look at their quality systems is, what is it you are doing? What is it you are trying to do? What are your goals? What are your business objectives? What are your compliance objectives? What are your regulatory assessments that have to be in place? We'll talk about centralized monitoring and how we can use that and how it's been brought into part of our risk-based approach. Having that other set of eyes, maybe, people always say that 30,000-foot view, so to speak, but really data management's in a critical position to be able to give us insight as to what's happening. And we'll talk about some of the experience that we've seen with that from a regulatory authority perspective. And we'll also talk about how do we actually go about using this information. Again, you can have a policy that says, hey, I'm going to do this, but how do we actually make it work for us?